Can you guys see my screen? Yes, no? All right. Okay, fine. So today we are going to start with our session number 11, which is going to be on directives. All right. So let me open the notepad. So we are going to cover directives today. First of all, let me tell you how many types of directives are there. Okay. So first type of directive is a component directive. Okay. And second type of directive is attribute directive. And third one is the structural directive. Okay. So these are three types of directives present in Angular 2. Okay. So now the question arises is, what is a directive? Right. So even if you look at Angular 1, Angular 1 was also majorly consisted of directives, right? However, in Angular 1.x, we generally making use of the inbuilt directives more rather than creating our own directives, right? But now what we are doing in Angular 2, we are creating our own directives altogether, right? So every time we create a component, right? Every time we create a component, it is nothing but a directive only. Okay. So if you look at it, where is it? Yeah. If I show you this one, okay, I just put it here. All right. So what is a directive? If anyone has worked on Angular 1, then they must have created some of the directives at some point of time, right? So what happens when you create a directive like this, right? So what is it? This app-root. What it says wherever in the HTML, it will look for something like this, right? It will look for something like this, app-root, and then app-root like this. Then what will happen? This will be replaced with this HTML file, right? So what we do when we create a directive, we basically create the HTML tags only, right? So everybody knows that div is a HTML tag, right? You need not to do anything for this. You just have to use the div directly, right? But when you look at this line number 14 to line number 17, you are looking at a syntax which looks like a HTML tag only, right? App header, right? What is this app header? Is it a inbuilt tag, inbuilt HTML element? No. App-header is not any inbuilt element. But what we are doing, we are creating a component or a element of our own, right? That is what the meaning of directive is, right? So internally, a component, a component is also a directive. Okay, so whatever component we have created, we created this header component, right? This is also nothing but a directive. Okay, so we generally create directives only. However, we do not name them as a directive because we name them as component. Okay, so component is also nothing but a directive. Okay, and we know how you use a component into another component, right? That we already know, right? So that is also called as a directive. Okay, so basically creating your own HTML tags. I'll not call them HTML tags because they are directives, but a syntax which looks like a HTML tag, right? And giving some definition to it, having some functions for them is nothing but a directive. Okay, so this component directives, we have created lot many, right? Whenever you create a component, you are creating a component directive only, right? Because anytime you are going to create a component, then you are going to use it like this only, right? This app hyphen header is a selector for header component. Similarly, in our index.html here, what is it? This is our root component, right? Root component means it is a also a directive because it is nothing but a kind of HTML tag only, right? But it is something which we own. It is not come by default in the HTML, right? So that's about the definition of a directive. Okay, so first type of directive I already told, which is component directive, right? Whenever you create a component, you are creating a directive only. Okay, now for today's session, our main focus will be on these two directives, attribute directive and structural directive. All right, so we will see how you can create these directives of your own. Okay, so what are the examples of attribute directive? We have seen in one of the sessions what are attribute directives, which are used as a attribute to your HTML tags or as an attribute to your components, right? So they were ng class, ng style, right? These were the examples of attribute directives, right? Then in the same session only, we talked about the structural directive as well. What structural directive does? They basically changes the structure of the DOM or the HTML, right? So one of them was ng switch, there was ng if, right? And there was ng4 as well. Okay, what were these? These were the structural directives, which basically changes the structure of the DOM. Okay, so what we will do is we will create our own directives now. Okay, these were what? These were inbuilt directives, right? Which Angular has given us: ng class, ng style, ng switch, ng if, ng4. These were inbuilt directives, right? But you can create your own directives as well, right? So one of them was component directives, which you generally create on your own. Okay. Then we will see about attribute and structural directive. Okay. So let me only write here ngif because we are going to talk about ngif today. All right. Yeah. Now coming to attribute directives or talking about attribute directives. Okay. So whenever you write something like this, let's suppose any HTML tag, right? When you are writing a HTML tag like image, then you generally add some attribute to it, right? The src is a attribute. Okay. So what is the meaning of attribute? Attribute is nothing but which basically adds some properties or some other features to the existing element. right? Just like for image, src adds some features. What is that feature? It's the path. It tells a path of the image. Okay. And similarly, if we talk about input tag, right? So what is type? Type tells about the what type of data you are going to write inside this input box. Okay. So what is it? These are attributes. Okay, these are attributes which add some information, which add some value to the HTML element. Okay. So similarly, what you can do is you can create a attribute directive. Okay. And how you will create that I will show you. All right. So let's suppose you are having a h2 tag. You can take any tag here, but let's take h2 one right now. All right. And what do you want? You want to create an attribute directive using which you can add some value to this h2 tag. Okay. Let's suppose currently this h2 is printing something, some text. Let's suppose hello, I am in h2 tag. Okay. Let's save this and run the server. Server is already running, and let's see the output here. Okay. So you can see it is printing hello, I am in h2 tag. Okay. But this is plain text, right? Let's suppose you want to do some stuff on this. You want to manipulate this text using the some attribute directive. Okay. So what we need to do, we need to first create a attribute directive, right? So how you create a directive? Here also your ng or Angular CLI will help us. Okay. So how you generate a component, or how you generate, let's say ng generate component and then name of the component like this, right? So similarly you will create the directive as well. All right. So how will you create? We will create like this, ng generate directive and then name of the directive. Okay. So what can be the name of a directive here? Okay. So as you can see, mostly or all the inbuilt directives of Angular starts with the prefix ng, right? Ng class, ng style, ng if, ng switch, ng for. All the inbuilt directives of Angular starts with ng, right? So it tells us one thing. What? That you should always have a prefix for your directives. Okay. And it should never be starting with ng. Okay. So I told two things here. You should always keep a prefix for your directives which you create. And it should never be starting with ng. Okay. Can anyone tell me what could be the reason behind these two statements? Why you should never start your directives name by ng, and why you should always have a prefix? Anyone? Okay, I got one answer. Ng is default Angular prefix. Yes, it is default prefix, but what is the consequence of it? Okay, so Janya says if ng is the prefix, Angular will treat it as inbuilt directive which is not available in predefined ones. No, Angular will not treat it as a inbuilt directive. Okay, I will tell. So I told two things here, right? First one, all right? Always have a prefix. And second one, never use ng prefix. Okay, so the explanation for the first one is that let's suppose you are working in a team, right? You guys are working in a team and you try to create a directive which basically highlights something. Okay, so you created it directly via name highlight. Okay, there is another member in your team who is working maybe in some other place and he also created the directive whose name is highlight, right? Now when your code will be merged, then what will happen? This highlight might have some other implementation, another highlight might have some other implementation, right? And when the code is merged, then either of your code will work. Both cannot work at the same time, right? Which will lead to the inappropriate behavior of your application, right? So that is why you should always have a prefix. Let's suppose you are working and your application name starts with something or whatever that you can choose. Okay, let's suppose for now I will use my uh, directive name something like custom directive app CDA highlight, something like that. CDA highlight. Okay, so just like this you can use any prefix. Okay, second thing, never use ng as a prefix. Okay, so for this one there are two reasons. First one is the maintainability. Okay, today you created a directive which highlights using ng highlight. Okay, so you created using ng highlight and it will not happen that Angular will treat it as its own directive. No, because it will have its own definition, so it will work for sure. Okay, so if you have written something like ng highlight, tomorrow you leave that project or you left the company, some other developer will take care of your code now, right? Then he might thought or he might think that ng highlight is something which is provided by Angular by default, because it is the common human tendency that we get used to the stuffs like this, right? Like if everything starting with ng is given by Angular, then this also must be given by Angular. Okay, that's the first reason. Second, which is the major reason, and that major reason is tomorrow, let's suppose Angular came up with its own directive of the same name, ng highlight, because Angular is anyways going to start their directives with ng. Okay, that is called as consistency in applications. They are anyways going to start their name of directive with ng. Okay, in that case your directive ng highlight will conflict with the one which is given by Angular. Okay, so is these two uh, points clear to everyone? These are very small things only, but yeah, you should always take care of these. Is this clear? Okay. So what I do is now I will create our directive. Ng generate directive, and then what do I say? I say maybe I start all the directives by custom. Okay, so I take a prefix custom, and then I create a directive called as custom highlight. Okay, what it will do that we will define, but first let's create a directive whose name is custom highlight, and I press enter. You will see it will create two files. First one will be the spec file, which is the test case file, which we will delete, and second one will be the actual file of our directive. Yes, we got two files created. Okay, so this spec file we can delete. We have to look for our custom highlight directive. Okay, so you can see whenever I write name like this, custom highlight in camel casing, you will see the file name automatically gets a hyphen there, custom hyphen highlight. Okay, so that's the intelligence of Angular CLI. All right, so when we have created this file, okay, so as you can see, I have created this file using Angular CLI. Okay, because it is always good to use that, but it doesn't mean that you cannot create it on its own. Okay, you can just create a new file and name it like this. That is also the same thing. Okay, but it's always better to use the Angular CLI. Now you can see in this file custom directive, there is some code written inside it. Okay, this looks little different. It's nothing different. If I just remove line number 1 to 5, okay, if I remove this, then what is left? Only one export statement and one class, then class name, and then one constructor inside that, and that's it. Okay, so that means a directive is also nothing but a class. Okay, you can see it is a simple class. Even you can remove the export statement as well, right? It is a simple class, but with some features. What are those features? They are mentioned via like this. Okay, so how you make a class as a directive? By using a decorator called as @directive. Okay, so if you use @directive and you use a property called as selector, and inside the selector you are passing the name. Okay, and then you are importing the directive decorator from Angular/core. Okay, simple. This is the vanilla flavor of our directive. Okay, now what we will do, we will do some task or perform something by using this custom directive. Okay, yeah. So Monica is asking a question, what is app custom highlight? Right. So as I told, when you create any directive, when you create this custom directive, when you create a component directive, right? When you created a component, you are having something called a selector like this, right? What this selector does? This selector says wherever you see a syntax like this, then perform something, right? Do some operation. Okay. Similarly, it has given us this selector. Okay. So this is nothing but a selector. So wherever you will be writing this selector, this name as an attribute. Okay. So what we will do, we will write it. Okay. Here we will use it. We will use this directive name. You can say that this is name of our directive. Okay. Yeah. All right. Now let's define the directive definition. All right. So currently our directive is doing nothing. It is having an empty constructor and there is no function, nothing inside it. Okay. Now we will give the definition to our directive. Let's suppose, and first let's apply this directive on our h2 tag. Okay. I just copy this and I apply it on the h2 tag. Okay. So what I have created an attribute directive. That is why I am using it as an attribute to my h2 tag. It is attribute, right? Just like in IMG, right? What is SRC? SRC is attribute. Similarly, in our h2 tag, I have applied app custom highlight as an attribute. All right. Now, what I want to do is I want to do something with this custom highlight directive. Okay. And what is that something? I want to apply some background color to my h2. Okay, so I want to give one custom directive to my application that as soon as you apply this directive to any element, it will have one background color. Okay, so let's write the code for it. Okay. Now just give attention to this, what I am going to write now. Okay. So there are two things in an attribute directive. What are those? Those are element reference and renderer. Okay, two things, element reference and a renderer. So what they do, I will tell you now. Okay, so what element reference gives you? Element reference gives you that particular element on which you are going to apply this directive. Okay, so we have applied this directive to h2 tag, right? So this element reference will give us the reference to this h2 tag. Okay, so first of all, let me show you how you will write this. You will first of all create a instance of element reference by writing maybe public element reference any name, and it is of type element reference, right? And you can also instantiate the renderer, and it is of type renderer, right? So what is element reference? Element reference is the reference to the element on which you have applied this directive. Okay, and what is renderer? Renderer will help you render the text inside that particular element. Okay, I'll show you how these both things, element reference and renderer, will help you to apply or to achieve what I was just telling, right? I was telling to this h2 element, I am going to apply one background color. Okay, now how will I do this? I will make use of renderer. Okay, so I have to use this dot renderer dot set element style. Okay, so what parameters it takes? It takes, first of all, I have to tell which element I have to apply this, right? I will write this dot element dot native element, and then I have to tell which property I want to apply. Let's suppose I want to apply the background color. Okay, let's suppose yellow. Okay, So renderer is the object which we've created like this, and set element style is its one of the functions which basically sets the style of the element. Okay, and this will take three arguments. First one is which is the element on which you want to apply. Okay, so this dot element dot native element will give us the access to the h2 element. Okay, and to that I am applying a property called as background color, and its value will be yellow. Okay, so this element is what? This element is nothing but the reference of our uh, it's an object of our element reference, okay, which we have just imported. Okay, so this element is nothing but it will be referring to the h2 tag. Okay, and dot native element is its property which will actually give you the access to the complete h2. Okay, or whatever the tag, h2 is just an example here. All right, so let's see, is it coming? Okay, first I have to run it. I have to run it using ng-serve. Okay, let's refresh this. All right, you can see that it is giving the h2 in yellow background color. Okay, so this is simple. How you achieve this? You just make use of two objects called as element reference and renderer. Renderer is nothing but which will help you render something, and element is reference is nothing but which will give you the access to the element on which you have applied the directive. Okay, so till now it is simple. You just made use of some properties which is given by renderer and element reference. Okay, now you want to do something more. Okay, what is that more? Let's suppose you want to do something like when you hover on this, right? When you bring your mouse on top of this tag, then you want to show this yellow background color, and when you remove the mouse, that background color should go away. Okay, so basically what you want to do, you want to listen to the events on this via this directive. Okay, so what you will do for that? For that, you have something called as host listener. Okay, what is host listener? If you divide this in two, it is divided as host and listener. Okay, so basically it will give you an object, or it is not actually an object, it is a decorator. Okay, host listener is a decorator which basically listens to the events happening on the host. Who is the host? Host is the one on which you have applied this directive. So h2 is our host now. Okay, and how will you use host listener? By using @host listener. Okay, and host listener will take what? It will take the name of the event to which you want to listen. What is the name of the event you want to listen? It is mouse enter. Okay, so as soon as the mouse enters, you want to do something, right? And how will you do it? You will do it via a function. So I can write something like on mouse enter, and you will use one function. Okay, now what you want to do, you want to apply the color, this background color, right? So I will just copy this code, or I will remove it from here and I will put it here. Okay. So what host listener does is basically starts listening to the events happening on the host. So what is the event we are listening? We are listening to mouse enter. So that means as soon as you will enter the mouse on the H2, this function will get called. Okay. If this function will get called, then it will automatically apply the background color to yellow. Okay. Let's save this and see here. So initially you can see there is no background color to this text, right? As soon as I will bring mouse on top of it, you can see it is automatically getting the background color as yellow. Okay. Now if I will remove this, nothing will happen, right? Because we told only this much. We told that on mouse enter, apply the background color, right? We haven't told if the mouse leaves, then what to do, right? We have to tell that as well. Okay. So for that, you will write again one more host listener at the red host listener of what? Mouse leave. Okay. Mouse leave is also an event. Okay. And then you can give a function with any name. I give on mouse leave maybe. Okay. So this name is my uh, custom. Okay. This on mouse leave. It's not nothing to do with the internal. Okay. So again, I will have this like this. Okay. And here, instead of telling yellow, I will say nothing, or I can say null. Okay. So it says on mouse leave, as soon as you will leave the mouse from the H2, it will set background color to nothing, empty. Okay. Let's save this and see. All right. So initially there is no color. As soon as I bring mouse on top of it, it is having yellow color. When I will remove the mouse from this, the background color is also removed. Okay. So you can see, you can play around with this. This is a kind of magic happening, right? As soon as you bring mouse, it is getting the color, and you remove it, color is also removed. Okay. Okay, Atul is asking a question. What is native element in listeners? Atul, what is the meaning of native element here? Actually, I didn't get your question. Are you there? Okay, you are asking about this native element. The element's native element, is it? Okay, so if you print this element, this is not your actual element. Okay, this is just a reference. Okay, you can see here we created the object of element reference. Okay, then there is a property like native element which will actually give you the element. Okay, just like when you study about the forms. Okay, inside a form there are a lot of things, but when you write form dot value, then you get the actual form. Same thing is happening here. You just got the reference initially, you created the object of the reference. Okay, when you use one of the property called as native element, then you get the actual element on which you want to apply. Okay. All right. So for now, what we were doing, we were hard coding this yellow color, right? In our scenario, when we were doing some stuff over our via directive, we were hard coding this yellow color. Okay, so if you give your directive to anyone, let's suppose you give this file as a directive to somebody else. Okay, then what he will be able to do? He will be able to just use this app custom highlight directive, right? But what he will get always, he will always get a yellow color in the background, right? But that should not happen, right? It should be up to the user of the directive, right? It should be up to the user. He can choose what color he want to use. Okay. So for that, what we need to do, we need to pass one value to our directive. Okay. And let's see how we will pass a value. So here, what we will write one property binding. Okay. Let's take a property binding. How you do a property binding? By using square bracket, right? And here we will pass one color as a property binding. Okay. And which color I want to pass? Let's suppose I want to pass green color. Okay, so what I am doing, I am writing one property binding color and I am sending it like this. I have written it in double quotes, single quotes, because it is a string and not a property of the component. So it should go as a string as green. Okay, now what I have to do, I have to get this property inside my custom directive, right? If you remember that while we studied about @input and @output, right? What we did to get this name inside app or app header, what we used? We used @input to catch this value, right? Similarly, in our attribute directive as well, we have to use @input to get this color value. Okay, so what we will write? We will write @input and it we will accept the color and we can give alias here color. Okay, it is giving underline to input because we have to import the input decorator. So let's import from the Angular/core. Okay, so we got the input decorator here. So what it will do? Input decorator. It will get the value of color and it will copy it into the local property whose name is color. Okay, what is this color refers to? This color refers to this input property binding. Okay, now what I can do is I can do pretty simple thing. Instead of hard coded this value yellow, I will mention this dot color. Okay, so that means now it is up to the user who is going to use my directive app custom highlight, right? He will just add one more property called as color, which color he want to use to highlight his elements. Okay, let's see here. It is refreshing. Now when I hover on this, you can see background color change to green, right? When I remove this, background color is removed. Okay, so now it has become a more of a generic directive. Okay, now you can give this directive file to anyone. Okay, just tell them that I am giving you a directive whose name is app custom highlight. Okay, what another person has to do in project? He has to just copy this file and he has to use this name in his elements like this. And then you can also tell in the documentation that if you want to change the color, then just pass one color property to the directive and it will work. Okay, one more thing is there which is happening behind the scene. That's one small thing. Okay, and that is about this app.module.ts. Okay, if you remember that while using anything, what we used to do, we have to first import that file, right? So here I am using this custom directive in my app.component.html here, but I haven't imported it. Okay, otherwise I should have imported this custom highlight directive.ts in my app.component.ts. Right here I should have imported it, like import what is the name, app custom highlight directive from dot slash custom highlight directive, like this, right? But I haven't done this. Why? Because Angular CLI has done one thing for us, and that is what? Importing this file, this custom directive into our module here. Okay, so if you see here, custom highlight directive. Okay, if you create via Angular CLI, it will automatically add this custom highlight directive to our module. Okay, so that is why we need not to import it in our component file, because it is already added to our module. Okay, if you would have created this file manually, right, if you would have created this file manually, then you have to come here and you have to add this directive here, and you have to import it as well, like this. All right, so that is where Angular CLI helps us a lot. Okay, but yeah, before using these automated tools, you should first know the implications as well, right? Tomorrow you will create this file and it will not work, right? But you should know, that is why you should know that you have to import it in your app.module.ts file as well. All right, yeah, so let's proceed next to our next type of directive, which is structural directive. Okay, so if I tell you in real life, you 90% of the cases you will be creating component directives only. Okay, so 90% of the cases you will be creating the components. Okay, 9% you will be creating the attribute directives. Okay, which I just created, like this custom directive, attribute directive. Okay, even I will say 10%. Okay, and this structural directive, I don't think so you will be ever going to create a structural directive. Okay, structural directive you are never going to create. All right, even attribute directives are a lot. Already Angular 2 has given you lot of attribute directives, but still there might be a chance that maybe 8 to 10% that you might have to create attribute directives sometime. Okay, but always, or maybe maximum of the times, your work or your use cases will be solved by component directives. All right, but just for example, what I will do is I will show you one example of the structural directives. Okay, implementation of a structural directive. All right, and for that I will show you the implementation of ngIf, how ngIf is implemented internally. Okay, or I will show you one directive. I already have one example of that. I'll show you how it will behave like ngIf. All right, so I have one directive already created whose name is cda struct directive. Okay, so what is this? cda hyphen struct hyphen directive means uh, custom cda I have given because of custom directive app, and then struct means structural. Okay, I have just given name like that, CDS struct directive. All right, and what this does the same thing which ng if does. Okay, so what I do is I'll show you how you will use it. So this is the one, I will put it here. Okay, and inside this I will write I am inside structural directive. Okay, so as you know, all the structural directives starts with star, right? Ng if, ng for, all of them starts with star. So the same thing we will do here. Our directive will also be starting with star. Okay, and this, what is this? This is the selector of our directive, right? Selector is app cds struct. Same name we have given here, app cds struct. Okay, and it can take two values, just like ng if, right? What is the structure of ng if? It's star ng if equals either true or false, right? So the same thing we are doing to our app cds struct. I am passing true or false. Okay, so let's see what is the definition of app cds struct directive. Where is it? It's here. All right, so in the nutshell you can see, if I just remove everything else, if I remove this and if I remove this, okay, so what is attribute structural directive? It is also a class, right? It is also a class, app class, export class, class name, right? But when you add some more things to it, it becomes a directive, right? So the same thing, add the red directive, then selector abstract, right? Now what extra we have here? Just like our custom highlight directive, we were having two things, element reference and renderer, right? What was the element reference? It was the reference to the element, and renderer is the object which basically helps us to render the text. Similarly, in a structural directive, what we have? We have template reference and view container reference. Okay, what is template reference? Template reference is the one which basically refers to the template on which our directive is applied. Okay, so where is it applied? Let's see, it is applied on the h2. Okay, so what template reference will point to? Template reference will point to the this content, whatever is inside it. Okay, and then we have the view container reference. Okay, so what view container reference points to? It behaves like a container to the template reference. Okay, so it virtually create a container for our template, whatever we got in the template reference. Okay, so similar to our attribute directive, we instantiated element reference and renderer. Similarly, we will do here. We have instantiated the template reference as well as view container reference. Both of them are instantiated. All right. Now the actual work starts. What is the actual work? Actual work is getting the value, this value, accessing this value true or false in our struct directive. Okay. So what we have written here, we have written at the rate input, because we want to get this value true or false, right? So we have written at the rate input. Then there is written set. Okay, and after set, if you remember what was set and get, these were the accessors. Set and get were the accessors in our if you remember, set and get we used in TypeScript, right, to make the accessors. Similarly, I am making it as a setter accessor to set the value of app CDS struct to true. Okay, that is why I have given the same name here, app CDS struct. What is the name? This name is same as selector. Okay, so that I can set the value of app CDS struct, and what will it will accept? It will accept a boolean value. Okay, it is accepting a boolean value, and after that it is simple code, right, where I am checking if value is true, then what to do. If this is true, what we want to display this content, right? What we are doing, we are basically mocking the ng if, right? If it is true, then I want to show it, otherwise I do not want to show it. So that is what written here. If it is true, then view container reference dot create embedded view. So create embedded view is a function of this reference, and to this I can pass the template reference. Okay, so that container got the template to render. Otherwise, if it is false, then I am just clearing the container reference. That means container reference or the container view container will be empty. Okay, so I know this syntax is pretty boring, and this syntax looks pretty tough to grasp, but yeah, as I told you, hardly going to create a structural directive, because you always be using the structural directive rather than creating on your own. Okay, so that is why I took this one being the simple, being the ng if, right, which does nothing, just hides and shows, right, and it has simple coding, right, simple as in very small lines of code, just one line here and one line here. Rest everything you have to just understand, because at the rate input is understandable, set is understandable, this is name of a function which accepts one true boolean value, right? That is why I took this as an example, so that it will be little easy to understand. Okay, the main thing which you need to focus is this template reference and the view container reference. Okay, template reference will point to the template which you will pass to the this function of container reference. Okay, so this is nothing but line number 14 and line number 17 is nothing but, in line number 14 I am putting the content, I am putting this content or template inside the container, view container, and at line number 17 I am just clearing it off, I am removing the content. Okay, so this template reference and view container reference, you might not listen of these terms anywhere else other than the structural directives. Okay, so this is about the structural directive. All right, and if I show you the output, you can see it is currently showing I am inside the structural directive. Okay, now if I will remake it to false, okay, if I pass false from here, then what will happen, it will remove it off, this will be removed. Once it is refreshed, you can see that is gone. If I again switch it back to true and I save this, then what will happen, that content will be appear. Yes, it is appearing now, right? So we are nothing but mocking the functionality of ng if directive, and ng if is a structural directive. Okay, so similarly, once again, the frequency which you will be doing is that component directive, you will anyways going to create many components, so 90% chance. Attribute directive, I will say not more than 8 to 10% of chance. And structural directive, almost never, almost negligible. Okay. Yeah. So I am done with today's session. There are few small topics which will be left from this will be the ng on it, ng on change, ng do check, and ng on destroy. Okay. So what they are called? They are called as the life cycle hooks. Okay. Life cycle of a component. Okay. This we are going to cover in a separate session. All right. So life cycle hooks we will cover in our upcoming sessions. And other than this, at the rate input and at the rate output, these two decorators we have already covered, right? We covered in previous sessions as well. We covered today as well, right? Yeah. So that's it. Okay, Namita is asking how we can differentiate between component directive and attribute directive. It is pretty simple. Component directive is nothing but a element directive. Okay, if I give you one example or a list of all three, okay, you can see here only all three types of directive are mentioned here. What is it? Line number 9. It is a element directive or a component directive. Okay, all the component directives will always be just like a HTML element, just like a div, right? Similarly, it is a component directive, right? What is an attribute directive? Attribute directive is always going to be used as an attribute, right? So what is this app custom highlight? It is getting used as an attribute of an element. This is an attribute directive. Then structural directive will always have star in front of it. This star app cd struct is a structural directive. All right. So this is about the uh, custom directives in Angular 2. Anyone have any questions? Yes, no, maybe. Okay, if it's clear to everyone, that's good. Okay. Oh, Atul is asking if I wanted to add animations on directives. Yeah, you can add. You can add animations as well. Animations as in you are anyways going to use some CSS properties, right? Just like I added a background color, you're going to use some other properties, right? Okay, anyways, it is going to be a CSS. Yeah. Any other doubts? Okay, cool. If not, then what we will do is we will meet on Wednesday now when we are going to cover pipes. Okay. So we will talk about pipes. Pipes are nothing but which pipes were the filters in Angular 1. Okay, in Angular 2, we call them pipes. All right. Okay, fine then. Let's close it and What I do is I upload this on the portal here in the reference material. All right. In the meantime, it gets uploaded. Then what I do is now I stop sharing my screen and we'll see you guys on Wednesday now. All right. Okay then. Bye bye. Have a good night.